Trust me.
Weapon system activated.
He's caped, cowed, and the coolest superhero of them all. Because underneath that batsuit, Batman only has his human strength and intellect to rely on. That and the greatest arsenal of crime-fighting weaponry ever devised.
Perhaps you should read the instructions first.
But just where does comic book science fiction end and scientific fact begin?
All of the tools have some credible basis in scientific reality.
What technologies are behind the gadgets in Batman's utility belt? And just how plausible is the Batmobile?
These machines now, they do really work.
Get ready for a real-life trip to the Batcave as we reveal the secrets behind Batman tech. His name is known to comic book fans and film-going audiences around the world.
I'm Batman.
But Batman isn't just your average, everyday crime-fighting superhero.
Taste of your own medicine, Doctor.
He's also a multi-billionaire who can afford to outfit himself with the very latest in high-tech wizardry.
The technology of Batman is important to the character because he doesn't have superpowers, and so the technology he employs, which he's able to finance through his great wealth and through his company, give him the advantage that he needs to fight crime.
Batman invents out of necessity.
Problem with the graphite, sir. The next 10,000 will be up to specifications.
When he finds something that's lacking in his arsenal of technology, he'll go out and try to find a solution for it. So, in a certain sense, you could say it's limitless.
Since his very first appearance in the pages of Detective Comics, Batman has used the iconography of a bat to strike fear into the hearts of Gotham City's most notorious arch-criminals.
Where are you?
Here. But unlike many other superheroes who have gene-altered gifts or possess out-of-this-world superpowers, Batman must rely on science to give him an edge over his enemies.
Well, he has to use technology in order to solve crimes and capture criminals. Other superheroes just use their superpowers. Batman relied on skill and technical knowledge.
Now, you couldn't really grow up to be Superman, but if you're really cool and really dedicated and really focused, you could become the Batman.
Bruce Wayne, of course, is a billionaire. He can have the cutting-edge technology he wants. Doesn't matter what kind of materials he wants to buy. And he's got the best people in the world working for him.
Well, what is it today?
One of the great things about Batman is that he has access to Lucius Fox and his department where they come up with all these amazing gadgets.
Here we are. Kevlar utility harness, gas-powered magnetic grapple gun, the 350-pound test monofilament.
As envisioned by comic book creator Bob Kane in 1939, Batman was originally more of a super sleuth than a superhero. In fact, his first crime-fighting gadgets were not much more sophisticated than standard lockpicks, passkeys, and an occasional glass cutter.
He was always on the cutting edge, but, you know, picks and cutters were probably the cutting edge in 1939.
Much of the early stories, it was really the technology of convenience. It was what people knew. Comic books were written for kids in the early days. They assumed the audience was 10 to 12 years old at best, and they weren't worried about addressing the technology of the time because they didn't figure the kids understood the technology at the time.
There were smoke pellets, gas bombs, things along those lines enabled to disable or confuse. These are the traditional weapons that Batman's able to pull out in order to achieve what he needs to achieve.
But there was one weapon Batman refused to carry for nearly all of his crime-fighting history: a gun.
He didn't carry a gun for very long because somebody quickly realized it was contrary to who and what he was. Here's a character whose parents had been killed by guns. A gun was anathema to him. It was something he really didn't want to touch. It was what had made him who he was. And it's much more heroic to solve the problem without simply being able to shoot the villain, but having to use your wits and your other abilities.
Instead of packing heat, Bruce Wayne relied on other, more innovative crime-fighting methods. Methods that became increasingly sophisticated over the years. In 1940, for example, Batman used infrared night vision goggles, a technology being developed at the time by the U.S. Navy.
Night vision is heat vision, is literally what it is. If you think about light, everyone's familiar with the spectrum of the rainbow, the red, yellow, green, blue. There's also different spectrums that we can't see. And infrared is what we refer to when we're talking about the type of radiation you get from heat. So any hot body will emit this type of radiation, and you can design cameras to detect it. And so night vision is basically looking at that wavelength of light. Batman has lots of gadgets, but Batman's great thing was that many of them are all small enough to fit in his utility belt. And making things small can be a challenge, but it's not technologically impossible, and that's driving a lot of technology these days, is how can we make things smaller and smaller and still function the way we want them to.
One early gadget Batman had in his utility belt was a miniature camera. The device was inspired by the ones actually being used by spies in the years prior to Batman's debut.
Clandestine photography goes back into the 1930s with the commercial menace camera. This was a camera that was invented in 1934 by a Latvian engineer by the name of Walter Zapp. His idea for the camera was a camera that could be held in one hand, but if you're not very dexterous with this camera, it does take two hands to cycle the film. In the commercial world, that's not an issue, but in our world, that draws attention, and we don't like that. Our challenge is to make a camera that can be easily concealed in one hand, small enough that it can be easily palmed. We want to be able to easily manipulate it with one hand, and while we're at it, we're CIA, we're always going to try to process improve. We're going to make ours take twice as many shots. This is the camera that did it. This is the agency's first sub-miniature document copy camera. A camera like this is like one Batman might have in his utility belt.
In the late 1940s and early 50s, as the world entered the atomic age, Batman's use of real science literally rocketed into the realm of science fiction.
In the 50s, a lot of the fiction was very science fiction based. So, Batman had ray guns. They flew in spaceships and things like that. It was just reflective of the times.
In Batman number 109, the Caped Crusader used a heat ray to detonate explosives floating in Gotham City Harbor. It seemed far-fetched at the time, and was. But believe it or not, the U.S. military is currently working on just such a device to add to its arsenal.
A heat ray is a low-frequency infrared kind of light, and the Army today is developing weapons based on heat rays, much like the one that Batman used.
Called the Active Denial System, this non-lethal weapon directs high-frequency microwaves over distances up to 550 yards.
Roger, I'm ready for a 100% shot, 3 seconds on the CLT.
Its heat ray is about as hot as a light bulb and can penetrate the clothing of aggressors without seriously harming them.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
As the 1960s ushered in technology that fueled the space race, Batman stayed a step ahead with advances of his own.
In the 60s, as computer systems, mainframes came into play, then people began to catch on to computerization. Batman had databases in the Batcave.
The first visible manifestation I saw of what a computer could be was the use of that technology on Batman. I think that was true probably for millions of kids. And maybe I was inclined to be a technology geek and learn how to do the programming in the early years because of it.
By the time the 90s came around, his computer systems were so sophisticated that he could tap into the law enforcement networks and keep on top of crime.
In today's world of GPS and cellular communications, the line between science fiction and science fact is getting thinner than ever.
You want his science to be based upon something that is real technology as well. So therefore, it doesn't break the conceit that you can be Batman and Batman can exist in our world.